Om Arunachala Shiva.
Good evening all. Welcome to the last segment of the online colloquium the Tadvanam Ashram is conducting as part of the Shivaratri celebration. So welcome you all for the session. Today's session, in today, we would look more into a particular text called Yogavasishta. It's part of Ramayana, and I'll further explain you in elaboration what's the context of the text. And Tadvanam Ashram, for the last year Shivaratri celebration, Tadvanam Ashram's talk was exclusively on Yogavasishta, and Mr. Dilip Nayatil has done an amazing interpretation of explanation of Yogavasishta very beautifully, and it's available in the same channel of Tadvanam Ashram. I also personally referred to that lectures as part of the preparation for today's session. It's very profound, and I'll recommend you all to go through that series. So it's in a very in-depth discussion which goes to 10 to 11 hours, 10-11 episodes that. So it's a very good starting point to understand the philosophy in Yogavasishta, to understand the text Yogavasishta. So I hope many who are part of Tadvanam Ashram are seriously reading Yogavasishta since so many years now, possibly I assume, because Tadvanam Ashram have taken up a very tremendous responsibility of translating the Brihat Yogavasishta into Malayalam, and again Mr. Dilip Nayatil is doing a great job, very consistent and precise job throughout years now. It's now maybe a 1000th day, every day he translates one sloka and shares with us in the group. So we are all witnessing the process of the translation also. And so I'm saying people who are part of Tadvanam Ashram and who had been part of the discourses which was happening in Tadvanam, in context of Tadvanam Ashram, would be aware of this text Yogavasishta. And for those otherwise it's not as popular as Bhagavad Gita in that context. Bhagavad Gita is a section which comes in the very significant moment in Mahabharata, the epic Mahabharata, and we all know the context of Bhagavad Gita. It had been discussed very widely and globally looked into, and a text which is even now most relevant in the contemporary time also. And Bhagavad Gita, in Ramayana, so these are the two epics of the Hindu pantheon, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and which involves two very prominent incarnations of Lord Vishnu. Again, one in Sri Krishna, Bhagavan Krishna in Mahabharata, who expounds the philosophy of Gita to Arjuna in the context of encouraging him to, empowering him to face the war ahead of him. And in Ramayana, it's Bhagavan Ram, who kills Ravana and re-establishes the social order. And in Ramayana, Yogavasishtam is the section of like a revelation of philosophical truth, like Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata. Like in this context, like as it's like formal position in the epic, it looks similar, but in the way of presentation, like it kinds of like contrast each other. Like it's like very beautifully different. It like very different in beautiful ways. And the context is before in Ramayana, before Lord Ram starts any of his heroic endeavors, like just before the epic story begins in a way, at the verge of the first act, like where like Rama is going with Vishwamitra to like in the initial expedition to like eradicate the Rakshasas who are like troubling their yajnas. Meanwhile, like he'll do the Ahalya Moksham, like he'll get married to Sita, he'll meet Janaka. And before this all happens, Vishwamitra comes to like Ayodhya, and, like meets King Dasharatha, and like saying, demanding like his son to accompany him like in this endeavor. But Dasharatha like has a different story to say, that he tells Vishwamitra that his son is a bit disinterested, disinterested in the worldly matters, because after his schooling, like he took a pilgrimage, a very long pilgrimage, and which changed his perspective to like turned his focus to spiritual matters, to the Adhyatmika matters, like Lord Buddha again, like one of the most prominent masters of Indian philosophy, most influential person, I guess, in the present history. He also like he was like grown up in a palace in a very luxurious environment. One day, like he goes out of the palace, he witnesses old age, suffering, death, poverty, hunger, like sickness, and like he just feel disenchanted from the beauties of the world, and he thinks of something beyond it, and like it gives him, it makes him disinterested. So this encounter with the reality in a very experiential level, in a very visceral way, is very like very significant in like Indian philosophy. So even in like look at Upanishad, like a seeker is born, like or a quest for something beyond what we see through the senses in the world. That is the beginning point of the seeker, and it often happens with a hard encounter with the reality. So the text, it says it's a moksha upaya. It's a solution for liberation. And how it solves the problem of existence is by expounding its nature. So the text Yogavasishtam is mainly about the nature of being, about like meditations on being with a capital B, that of existence itself. And to give a context of the text, it in Ramayana it is a text with 36,000 verses with 6 prakaranas. It's a very broad text, but around 9th century AD, from Kashmir, like a person called Abhinandana, he abridges this Brihat Yogavasishta to like a very brief version of it with 6,000 verses, but he retains the 6 prakaranas. The 6 prakaranas are like 6 chapters of the text, and it's very the chapterization is very interesting. Like I'll go further again, like elaborate into it in a while. And my reference for this talk, my main reference is the book called Vasishta Sudha by Professor G. Balakrishnan Nair, where like he have retained many of the verses as such with translation, but like the repeating phases, like there is a lot of repetition happening like in narration. Like those who have like are familiar with the text, you will know same theme is like addressed in different perspective in different ways, like in and you'll and that repetitions like he have like explained in prose. So it's a very like profound book, and like it have and like the person who have written this like has a very profound understanding of Indian philosophy as well, where like he bring in like references from other philosophical schools which make us kind of familiarized with the theme discussed in Yoga Vasishta. So this book had been like quite influential. I'll read out a paragraph on it. Many assume the text was written somewhere. This is an expert translated from the introduction of Vasishta Sudha. So many assume the text was written somewhere in the 6th century AD. This is by tracing the influence of Yoga Vasishta from the works of eminaries who lived after the 6th century, like Gaudapada, Shankara, and Sureshwaracharya. The texts under consideration are Mandukya Karika of Gaudapada, Viveka Chudamani of Shankaracharya, and Sureshwaracharya's Manasolasam, which is a commentary of Shankara's Dakshinamurti Stotra. Professor Balakrishnan Nair, in his foreword to Vasishta Sudha, refers to conclusions made by Professor B.L. Atreya, who translated the text to English. According to Professor B.L. Atreya, as quoted in Professor Balakrishnan Nair, there are tremendous influence of Yoga Vasishta in above mentioned text, Mandukya Karika, Manasolasam, Viveka Chudamani, etc. Professor Balakrishnan Nair further refers to many works such as Maha Upanishad, where one could identify slokas from Yoga Vasishta to underline the significance of Yoga Vasishta in Advaita Vedanta school. So Gaudapada, Shankaracharya, Sureshwaracharya are all like coming from the lineage of Advaita philosophy, and Yoga Vasishta had been like a tremendous influence in the non-dual philosophy of the school of Shankara. And again, looking at the emergence of Laghu Yoga Vasishta with 6,000 verses by Abhinandana is from Kashmir, and it's around like 9th century AD. And this is a time where Takshashila University was like very much influential in that region and even in the intelligentsia of Indian civilization of that time. So Yoga Vasishta is not a text which sustained time through isolation, but it has been like interacting with the emergent philosophies of then time, like throughout time in a way. And so this is the historical context of Yoga Vasishta. And I had been like while I was preparing for this colloquium, I had been like going through this like dilemma of like how to format this discussion, because one side we have a like very elaborate interpretation of Yoga Vasishta from the last year within Tadvanam Ashrama by Mr. Dilip Nayatil, and there is a very profound text available like where we can even like the text like many a times says with some contemplation and some reading anyone can understand the truth. So like these are there, and so there is nothing more to be like conveyed which is very esoteric in this, like it's very much explicit like in the text and in the existing deliberations regarding the text, secondary sources regarding the text, it is very much available, though it is not popular. So I thought like how to frame this discourse which we are having right now. So I had a feeling like even the form of the text Yoga Vasishta. So I'll tell you briefly about like the context of what's happening within the text. So the author of Ramayana, his Valmiki, his disciple is Bharadwaj. So Bharadwaj come to Valmiki and he asks, "O master, how did Lord Ram survive the turmoils of samsara? So for him, Ram is the for not for just him, for the entire Hindu pantheon, Ram is understood or like looked up at as the epitome of human being, the Maryada Purushottam, the epitome of civilized being, the most uh, intelligent and efficient human being. So how did a person like that survived samsara? And it's very much like in common sense we can understand like Bharadwaja, like we also as like a friend of mine struggles with some anxiety, how to tackle down that, like that possibly like he's asking for himself, no, and like Vatmiki understands this, and he says, oh, I'll tell you. Very true. He also encountered this existential angst, and he came out of it. And Vatmiki says like I'll tell you how. And this is the first layer of narration happening in the text, as you know, like how Indian epic narratives work. There is a narrative plane, and like then there is a narrative within a narrative, then somebody else come to that narrative to tell a story. So similarly, this Yogavasishta also like works in layers of narrative, and the first layer is the discussion between Vatmiki and Bharadwaj. And like Vatmiki is telling the story of Ram, who's discussing his existential angst, his vairagya to his teacher Vasishta. And Vasishta begins telling the story of how he was taught, like how he came out of this delusion of samsara, and like how his father Brahma reveals that to him. And then the narratives, like the further narratives of Yoga Vasisht goes within and sometimes come out, and like it goes through different planes of existence, like of narrative world as such. So it's a very complex world of narrative which will unfold when you start reading the text. I got introduced to Yoga Vasisht by Jayatan in 2018. There is a personal connection with this text. There are books which might take months or year to complete, right? Vasishta Sudha is such a book. I started reading Vasishta Sudha in 2018, as I said. It was a monsoon. It rained as I read along. It rained more and more. Those who know remember in 2018, Kerala faced a massive and historic flood situation. My home was also affected by the flood. I, with my family, stayed in a house surrounded by water for a whole night, keeping an eye if the water was rising or receding. There was no electricity. The darkness was strangely thick. The night sounded different. The air was heavy with silence. That night is a significant night in my life, which changed my outlook of the reality forever. So many things which I took for granted no more looked like that anymore. I felt the ephemerality of everything. I realized reading about momentariness of the world and facing it on ground are two different experiences. I could not continue reading Yoga Vasisht after that. I was overwhelmed. It took me another 2 years to come back to Yoga Vasisht. When I was in Delhi doing my MPhil, that was the year the world got affected by the pandemic. I had to pause everything I was doing and had to fly back home overnight. I could not finish reading the book at the time of quarantine. Yoga Vasisht came back again to me after a couple of years. I resumed reading it for the third time in 2022. This time I was able to finish reading the book. I got married in 2022. What I'm trying to say is, this book has stayed with me for a very long time. I had been reading this book in three major fatal events that happened in my life. It was never a one go readable book for me. Well, that's the personal connection I was trying to talk about while like choosing Vasishta Sudha. Like as a text to contemplate on, as a sadhyaya again, in the context of this talk. That while I was reading something in the book that like about life and about reality, that it can be like unreal, it can be dreamlike, and when like events come to my life and like I'm forced to witness or be in events which are like very catastrophic and which can shake the very notion of reality we have, and that time the book hits differently, and that's my point. And maybe the book found me, and like maybe the book made me look at those events when I went through it like in a very different lens altogether. And that's why this book is very personal and very close to me. And what is it about? Yoga Vasishta expounds the knowledge about the true nature of reality, the text. What do I mean by knowledge here? In analytic philosophy, knowledge could be classified to three kinds. The first kind is knowledge by acquaintance, where one knows about existence of something, even when we do not know what it means. Like I know about the existence of a text called Yogavasishta. It was written possibly around 6th century AD, originated from Kashmir, etc. This is a knowledge from the periphery of the subject. The kind of knowledge works in day to day life. This kind of knowledge works in day to day life. Like I know about Kumbh Mela, that it happens once every 12 years in Prayagraj, etc. Such knowledge lacks substantial context or substantial content about the object of knowledge, but it is often the beginning of a deeper quest. Curiosity is the mark of such knowledge. The second level of knowledge is propositional knowledge. This is a tricky one. Propositional knowledge is deeper than the knowledge by acquaintance. This is definitional or theoretical knowledge. Much of the textbooks, any textbooks in that sense, deals with this kind of knowledge. If the first kind of knowledge relates to recognition, the second kind is about cognition. This is how much one understands something intellectually, in language. This kind of knowledge, let us talk about it. Anything we say about Yoga Vasishta is of the propositional kind. Even the experience of reading the text is of such knowledge. The textbook, what we read from the textbook, is propositional knowledges. And what does it mean to us? That is different. I am coming to that part. Simply said, it's a way a concept is communicated to the intellect through means of language, the second kind of knowledge. This knowledge delves in the realm of articulation or language. Much of philosophy in the West had been about this type of knowledge, which let one talk about the subject under investigation. Talk about naming, labeling, classifying, recollecting, memorizing, and recollecting, etc. belongs to this realm of knowledge. Scientific theories rely on this kind of knowledge to theorize their observations. Third kind of knowledge now is the knowledge by practice. It's about things you know how to do. For example, you know how to cycle, or you know how to, clarify a martial art. This kind of knowledge is much more deeper, that the essence of this knowledge cannot be expressed in words. How do you say your knowledge in Kalaripayat? How do you say your knowledge in cycling? You can show them cycling, or you can do Kalaripayat, but you cannot say anything about it, right? And this kind of knowledge is much deeper, that the essence of this cannot be expressed in words. Only way to grasp such a knowledge is by practice. You cannot read about cycling and ride a bicycle. This third kind of knowledge delves rather beyond the realm of language. The propositional knowledge could guide you towards this practical knowledge, but it cannot be substituted. There is no chronology of these three layers of knowledge. Though it has a general trend, logically we could say the first step is I have heard about Yogavasishta. The second step, I have read Yogavasishta. And the third be, I have understood it. But it is possible that some people can have a very different order of things happening. For example, Ramana Maharshi has had the experience of Advaita, and when a scholar encountered him and expounded the Shastras, he surprisingly recognized his realization was in tune with the wisdom from the Shastras. You know the story, that. Another reason I brought up this discourse of the kinds of knowledge. Now, why do I go deep into these different kinds of knowledge is with a purpose. So I'll tell that. So another reason I brought up this discourse on the kinds of knowledge is to underline the intention behind approaching a text. In our case, why would I approach the text Yogavasishta? This could be in different layers. I could approach this just to make acquaintance with it, just to say that I have seen it, I have touched it, or to familiarize with it. Okay, I know it is about Brahma, Advaita. Once you read the introduction, you will get an idea of the text. It's driven by initial curiosity. I could confidently make a statement, say I have heard about it, I tried reading it, etc. This is the first level in approach. The second level is an actual attempt to read the book, try to understand it. So the first level, I just go through it so that I can tell you, okay, like once I meet Jayat asks like, Sachin, like, did you read that book? Yes, I have tried reading it, I can say that. You attempt it, but you don't, it's like the story of the bee drinking the honey from the brim of the glass. So the master wants the bee delve into the honey and like die in it, like go into it, like explore it, give your whole idea to it. And once, I'm not saying the first kind of thing is like hypocritical, I'm saying it is the beginning of it. So like we move from that, like I try to read it. Okay, Jayatan told to read about Yogavasishta, he suggested this. So like if he have said there will be something in the text, let me read it. So that kind of personal connection comes to it. So that is the first kind. I'm not demeaning it, but it's the first step to it. And secondly, you get the taste of the book, and you don't mind if Jayatan thinks whether I have read it or not. You don't mind if you are able to discuss about it with someone, but you just try to read it honestly, like genuinely, and you get like plunged into this book. So this is the next step of like going into a text. The second level is an actual attempt to read the book, try to understand it. I intend to discuss Yogavasishta in an academic or intellectual orientation. It's kind of how do we like academically approach this book? What we can only share is thoughts, and like through thoughts we try to convey like our visceral experiences, right? So that is kind of impossible in a way to share like directly what one feel to another one. Like the shared experience only possible through language in a way. And so this layer is mainly intellectual labor. The third layer of intention is much more personal, a practice oriented one. Though it has an academic perspective, like you keep this book like as an object of reference in an academic perspective, but you definitely have a personal aspect to it. So that is a bit more deeper layer, like which we are trying to delve into this book, like which we are trying to approach, like this is how we are trying to approach this book. The third layer of intention is much more personal, a practice oriented one. How to use or apply the knowledge of Yogavasishta not to inform a third person, but for myself in my practical life. So I read this text and interpret it for you people, but I also simultaneously there is another process happening, that I'm reading it by myself and I'm like seeing like how it is congruent with my personal experiences. So there is a personal level of reading to this text. So when I'm talking about this text, all these like bits and pieces from all these layers like comes into treatment. So these layers are congruent with any other theme as well. For example, in school we learned about gravity and Isaac Newton. In college, if I take physics as major, I learn different aspects of it. I learn it in contrast with subatomic physics. So I was trying to bring up the example like in any subject, it is possible that these layers work out. So for example, like we learn physics like from high school, and like we learn about gravity and like Isaac Newton in high school in a very introductory way. That is the first layer of reading or approaching a text. And once we go to like higher education to college, like if I'm doing BSc physics, so the way I look into gravity, the way I articulate gravity is totally different. It's in the language of mathematics, it's in the language of like logical formulas, mathematical formulas. And once you start working as a scientist, this you apply it in a very different way. Like you learn E is equal to mc square in the college, but you once you start working as an atomic physicist, you do that E is equal to mc square into some other thing, into an atom bomb, into a nuclear power plant, into energy resources. Like, so these are the layers of learning I'm talking about. Like you're learning about the things, like neither is like redundant, it's all needed, it's all part of the game, but there are like layers of, and maybe you understand something you learned in your school like way better when you're doing that atomic physics. So these are the, why I'm saying is that learning is a very dynamic process. And if I'm learning something like while I'm like simultaneously while I'm talking about Yogavasishta to you. So it's a newer experience for me in a personal level also. My approach to Yogavasishta, in context of this colloquium, focus much on the third layer of knowledge, the practical or experiential aspect of it, instead of having an academic rhetoric, though it has an approach. It's not delving in there. I am no man to say authentically what the text means. Rather, all I can do is to say what this text meant to me, for whom this text is for. So, in any Indian philosophy, there is something unique to Indian philosophy in general. There is a trend which is seen in many philosophical texts. They expound who is deserving of this textbook. Generally, generally deserving are those who are suffering. It is dukkha in Buddhism, tabha in Sankhya, klesha in yoga, or avidya in Advaita, etc. The seeker of truth is often the one burdened with suffering. They are no more satisfied with the make believe happiness of the world. A parallel to this in the continental Western philosophy be the existential angst. Existential angst refers to the feeling of deep stated unease, apprehension, and uncertainty that arises from contemplating the human condition and the inherent meaninglessness in life. For those who are not like aware of what existentialism is or existential angst is, existentialism is a relatively new school of thought which emerged in Europe after the catastrophe of World War. In the 1940s, philosophers like Sartre and Camus started a new movement in Western philosophy, claiming the ultimate object of inquiry in philosophy is existence. They abandoned the positivist quest for ultimate objective truth as the primary curiosity of philosophy. They build up on philosophers like Husserl and Heidegger to articulate a systemic inquiry into the true nature of being. So I said it's a, like in Western philosophy there is something called existential angst, and in Indian philosophy there is something parallel to it, or like I attempt to find tangential with Western existentialism. I attempt to find tangentialities with Western existentialism to underline the relevance of this ancient school of philosophy. Though it is of ancient origins, it cannot be outdated. It addresses a very contemporary issue pertaining to existence. Yogavasishta is a step deeper in this issue of who is worthy of its knowledge. It's of the Samskrita Buddhi, a mind seasoned by seeing the flickering ephemerality inherent in the world of affairs and is deeply dissatisfied with worldly affairs. It's for those who have already tasted the reality of the world, yet to be in terms with it. So, in Buddhism or in Sankhya, like we'll see, suffering is the prerequisite of a philosophical inquiry. In Yogavasishta, it's more uh, refined or elite in a way. That who deserves this book? This book belongs to those who are the Samskrita Buddhis, like who have a refined intellect, who have already contemplated on the existence and is deeply dissatisfied by the pleasures of worldly affairs. So once you encounter this inherent meaninglessness in world, once you encounter the existential angst as called by the contemporary philosophers, how to overcome, like for those who have gone through it, this anxiety is, it's not a mood, it's kind of a way of seeing at things at all. I mean, we don't see the world as it is, like we kind of find it absurd, like there is a profound question of why is it happening like this, why is this world like this, what does it mean, like what's the purpose in life. So these kind of profound questions echoes in the core of being, and we don't know what to turn to. And this book is for those who want to address this meaninglessness in life, this existential angst. And anyone with a clear cognition, through consistent introspection and applying logic, can figure out that the reality of diversity is ephemeral. It lacks grounding, the reality. This is expounded in the Advaita Vedanta. One who experiences this truth becomes a Vairagi. The first thing to come up from the experience of truth is Vairagya, a disenchantment from the diverse sensory pleasure of worldly affairs. Then there is primordial curiosity to know the ultimate reality, the Brahma Jijnasa. This curiosity is not sheer intellectual, it's a yearning to experience the truth, which pushes one to challenge all the preconceived notions regarding the world and self. It also refers to a dissatisfaction in the ways the world operates in a peripheral level. There is a lack which the sensory world hides from us, which is revealed only through introspection. Through Brahma Jijnasa, one starts working towards understanding the nature of reality beyond the veils of sensory experience. Though Vairagya is the starting point, it matures to Viveka or discriminatory knowledge, which with acceptance towards the true nature of the things. The conversation between Vasishta and Rama in the Yogavasishta is mainly intended towards transformation of Rama from the state of a Vairagi to the state of a Viveki. While in Western existentialism, this angst emerges from a perceived sense of meaninglessness of the world and purposelessness in life, in Yogavasishta, the Vairagya is caused due to the perceived unreality or ephemerality of the world. The self stands bare, devoid of any cause or effect, as a perceiver of momentary nature of the world. So, even in Sankhya, even in Yogavasishta, like the cause of suffering is a misunderstanding about the reality of everything. So once you know the nature of the world, you automatically come out of that suffering. So you just forgot something about the world and you just need to recollect it. Or you just have ignored an aspect of the world, our focus have drifted, and maybe we just need to adjust our focus to that reality. According to Yoga Vasishta, the world is not only momentary, the very fabric of the world is not real. The world seemed to be real like in a dream. The dream seems so real while dreaming, but once awake, it's not there. The dreamlike nature of reality as a philosophical disposition had been explored across time and cultural epoch, like Descartes' dream argument in Meditations on First Philosophy. Descartes is a 17th century Western philosopher, or on the Zen notion of dreaming butterfly. It remains a significant challenge to philosophers and epistemologists and continues to influence debates about the nature of knowledge, reality, and perception. What makes us sure that the world we live in, the life we live, are all part of a dream? I often dream of being in strange lands doing unusual things. Sometimes I dream another unlived time and day in my wakeful life. Sometimes I dream another unlived time and day in my wakeful life, while in reality I am sleeping on a bed. In the dream, I am deceived into believing that the world and life in the dream is the real until I wake up. How can I understand if this present moment is a dream or not? How can I be certain if my current experiences are not just a dream? Until I reach that certainty, I must consider the possibility that I might be dreaming right now, and that all my perceptions, including my sense of self and the external world, might be mere illusions. This predicament of mine underlines the limitations of my cognition. I cannot be certain about anything to be real, including my own existence. But I cannot deny my own existence. Even if I am dreaming, I do exist. I witness this dream as I think and try to make sense of this dream. Understanding this foundational nature of the world, that it is uncertain that if it is real or not, anirvachaniya, and coming to terms with it is the crux of Yogavasishta. Those who are deserving of Yogavasishta are those who have already experienced the dreamlike nature of the world and is eager to come out of it. Existence of dream is very significant as a spiritual metaphor, that we all dream, and that experience of dreaming makes us think about the fabric of reality of this world. We experience a dream state, and that is the first hand knowledge of possibility of a world beyond real. Anybody who has dreamt would understand the power of mind to create an alternate sensory reality which does not necessarily correspond to the external world of real. This experience is enough to challenge the reality of the external world. Throughout history, humankind has tried to decipher the allegory of dreams. Dream state is an enigma. The dream state is an enigma for even the contemporary science and has been a subject of interpretation in sacred as well as scientific settings. So this is the foundational understandings of Yogavasishta, that the world is not real and the person who is seeing the world is the always real one, and we cannot say anything about the truth of the external existence, and we take it as a given truth. And keeping this philosophical foundation, we need to look into the text and we need to see where this text is placed within the framework of a larger philosophical network of like Advaita philosophy, and like again a larger philosophical network of the Shat Darshanas of Buddhism, Jainism, like Charvakas. Like this text is placed in such a historical context and it is addressing that kind of a very vibrant intellectual spectrum. So, going back to the formal aspect of the text, as I mentioned earlier, even in the Laghu Yogavasishta as in Brihad Yogavasishta, like they have retained the 6 chapters, the 6 prakranas, and this chapterization is something very interesting. Though the topics which are like talked about are like often like overlapping in each chapter, like we'll encounter the same theme in a different aspect. We'll come back to the same point from a different way. It happens again, like there is a strange kind of repetition of themes, but in a very novel way, in a very diverse way throughout. Though it is there, like this chapterization, like enlightens about something. Like there is a metaphysical progression. So the first prakaranam is the Vairagya prakaranam, and in the Vairagya prakaranam, there are few things which are like expounded. One is like the problem with existence, the Jagadosha Varnanam, and the second is the nature of my disinterest, my disenchantment from the world, that is the Vairagya Varnanam, and again in the notion of Sankalpa. This notion of Sankalpa, so these three things we'll talk about from the Vairagya Prakaranam. One is the nature of Vairagya, one is the nature of the world, and one is the word, the theme of Sankalpa. The Sankalpa again repeats, it's a core foundation of like Maya or Avidya in Shankara's Advaita. In Yogavasishta, the word is Sankalpa. It is the core of this entire philosophical problem. And then the second prakarana is the Mumuksha Vyavahara prakarana, where Vasishta, so in the first prakaranam, it's Raman's problem, and like though it is interactions are there, like the core is Raman's problem, and in the second Raman's interaction with Vishwamitra, the second prakaranam Vasishtan starts speaking, and like he expounds, and even Vishwamitra expounds the nature of the mumukshu, like the seeker who has encountered the Vairagya. Okay, we understand, you have reached, you have experienced the bitter truth of the purposelessness of life. So now how to behave, how to come out of it. So that is the Vyavahara of the Mumukshu. That's the affairs of the Mumukshu. Mumukshu is whom? Who's intellectually seeking a way out of this bizarreness of the world. And as a response to Mumukshu Vyavahara, like what is Mumukshu like interested in? It is, he is interested, he or she or they are interested in the nature of reality of the self and the world. So in the beginning, so the next prakarana talks about the creation, the Utpatti prakarana, where it talks about the origination of things, the ontology of things. And then it's the Sthiti prakarana, and how these weirdly like emerged things are like existing, are surviving, and where is it going. And once you know that, you reach a point of Upashamam, that is the fifth prakarana, the Upashama prakaranam, where the mumukshu takes a 180-degree turn and like see at things in a very different perspective. Like I remember, like I met a sadhu in a train, and I asked him, like I was doing philosophy that time, like masters in a travel from Surat to Delhi. I met him and I asked, like, Baba, kya hota hai, like nirvana prapt hone mein, like what happens when you enlighten? So he returned, beta srishti nahi badalta, drishti badalta. So beta, it's not the creation that changes, but the way you look at it. So it's the same thing, but so once you come to the Upashama Prakarana, when we are talking about this theme of Upashama, like we'll elaborate it in detail, like it's very interesting part. And then there is Nirvana, there is the liberation. So then like you exist liberated. So I'll try to, so in the in a 1.5 hour span, like an elaborate discussion of like these concepts in a chronological order or in a narrative order is kind of not sensible to do. So what I'll do is I'll go through like some key concepts of these prakaranams, and like we'll pick up some key words to meditate on. So these are words like which we need to come back again and again to, and to elaborate our horizon of understanding, like our horizon of prejudice, as Gadamer says. So we'll take up certain keywords to ponder on, like later on again too. than to give an overview of Yogavasishta, like than to say what it is about, I'll rather go into personal interpretations of certain keywords which will kind of give a holistic way of like what's the discourse happening in Yogavasishta. So we'll delve tomorrow, possibly. We'll start from the key points of like the themes dealt in Yoga Vasishta. Right.
Om